Billionaire father sees black waitress, let disabled son lead a dance step, and then changes her life forever. The silence that fell over Kingsley's, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, was so thick it seemed to have weight. Conversation ceased, cutlery froze in midair, and dozens of eyes fixed on the small space between the tables. 10-year-old Lucas Montgomery was visibly shaking. His legs, trapped in metal braces, wavered as he reached out to Diana Johnson, the restaurant's only black waitress. The live piano had just begun a soft melody, and the boy's impulse to ask someone to dance had come without warning. "Sir, control your son," Manager Thornton's sharp voice cut through the silence. "That's inappropriate. This is not a dance hall, and our employees are not here to entertain children." Richard Montgomery, owner of Montgomery Investments and one of the richest men in the country, swallowed hard. It was the first time he had taken Lucas out to dinner in public since the accident that had partially paralyzed his legs 2 years earlier, a mistake he was determined not to repeat. "Lucas, sit down." The order came low but firm. Diana remained motionless, her gaze shifting between the manager, the billionaire, and the boy whose hand was still hanging in the air. In her 5 years working there, she had learned to become invisible, especially to customers like Montgomery. "Mr. Thornton, I'm leaving. My shift is over." Her voice was calm as she removed her apron and placed it on the tray. Then, to everyone's amazement, she smiled at Lucas and took his hand. "I can't dance in an apron." Richard stood up abruptly. "What do you think you're doing?" Diana held his gaze. "I'm accepting an invitation, sir." Before anyone could interfere, Lucas took a hesitant step forward. His foot dragged painfully across the floor, and the metal of his braces screeched. But Diana didn't try to guide him or hurry him. She simply adjusted her own pace to his. "She's getting fired tomorrow," whispered a woman at the next table. Richard watched, paralyzed. A sudden memory struck him. Elizabeth, his late wife, dancing with Lucas in the living room. "It's not about perfection," she had said. "It's about connection." As Diana followed Lucas's clumsy steps, something in the boy's eyes changed. Fear gave way to intense concentration. Shame gave way to shy pride. For the first time since the accident, he wasn't being guided, helped, or corrected. He was leading. "Mr. Montgomery," the manager's voice interrupted his thoughts. "I can assure you this will never happen again. She will be properly disciplined." Richard didn't respond. The entire restaurant seemed to wait for his reaction. After all, a man of his power could end anyone's career with a single word. Employees stopped what they were doing. Other customers watched with morbid curiosity. Lucas's smile, however, was the only thing echoing in his mind. Diana led the boy back to the table after 3 dance steps. "Thank you for asking me out," she said formally, as if speaking to an adult. "It was an honor." When she turned to leave, Richard stopped her. "Wait." His voice sounded different, almost unrecognizable to himself. "What's your full name?" "Diana Johnson, sir." Richard nodded slowly. "Diana Johnson," he repeated, as if memorizing it. Then he took a card from inside his jacket and held it out to her. "My office tomorrow, 10 a.m. The entire restaurant held its breath. Diana accepted the card without showing any emotion, but her hand trembled slightly. "Dad," Lucas called as she walked away. "Why did you do that?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Richard watched his son and, for a brief moment, saw not just the child Elizabeth had left in his care, but a complete human being whose wants and needs he had systematically ignored for 2 years. As dinner proceeded in awkward silence, no one noticed Diana's glance before she left, not out of fear or resignation, but out of a calm determination that contrasted with the storm brewing in Richard Montgomery's eyes. If this story about dignity and transformation is already touching your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow how a simple gesture of respect can spark a silent revolution capable of transforming lives forever. The lobby of Montgomery Tower sparkled, its glass and marble walls reflecting the morning sunlight. Diana Johnson immediately felt out of place in her best outfit, a navy blue skirt and white blouse bought on sale. The people passing by wore clothes that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "Diana Johnson to see Mr. Montgomery," she said to the receptionist, who examined her with a clinical gaze before making a call. 18th floor. "Miss Winters will see you." In the elevator, Diana took a deep breath, clutching her worn purse to her chest. It wasn't fear she felt. It was a quiet determination that came from having faced worse, much worse. Miss Winters was a woman in her 40s with a sharp gaze and impeccable posture. "Mr. Montgomery is in a conference call. Please follow me." As she walked through the mirrored hallways, Diana felt the curious stares of the employees. A black woman being escorted through the executive offices was rare enough to cause speculation. "He had you fired, didn't he?" Winters asked suddenly when they were alone in a waiting room. "It happens. Powerful clients call and people like you lose their jobs." "People like me?" "You know what I mean." Winters adjusted her glasses. "Employees who don't know their place?" Diana smiled, not amused. "And where exactly would that be?" Before Winters could answer, her phone rang. "He'll see you now." Richard Montgomery's office took up half the floor. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan looked like a distant playground. The man stood gazing out at the city as if it were his personal property. "Mr. Montgomery," Diana greeted him formally. Richard turned, his face a mask of studied control. "Miss Johnson, thank you for coming." He gestured toward a chair. "Please." The silence that followed was deliberate, a tactic Diana recognized immediately. It was the kind of silence designed to make nervous people talk too much, even incriminate themselves. "Do you have a background?" Richard finally asked. "Excuse me?" "Education." "College?" Diana kept her gaze steady. "Bachelor's degree in child development from NYU. Incomplete master's degree in special education." Something flickered across Richard's face. Surprise, perhaps. "And you work as a waitress?" "I work 3 jobs, actually. The restaurant, a bookstore on weekends, and as a tutor when I can get students." Richard moved closer to the table, picking up a folder. "I did some research on you, Miss Johnson. I wanted to understand who the person was who—" He hesitated. "Danced with my son." He opened the folder, revealing printed photos of a community center. "Freedom Steps. You founded that 6 years ago?" Diana sat up straighter. "I co-founded it with my sister Zoe, a dance program for children with physical disabilities." Richard leafed through some documents, which is now about to close due to lack of funding. Diana showed no surprise. Of course he would have found all of that out in less than 24 hours. "I didn't come here to ask you for money, Mr. Montgomery." "Then why did you come?" "Because you invited me." Richard laughed softly, a joyless sound. "Fair enough." He stood up, restless. "I want you to work for me." Diana blinked, genuinely taken aback. "As a waitress? In your house?" Richard's face hardened. As a therapeutic companion for Lucas, his son's name seemed difficult for him to say. Diana noticed his eyes momentarily drift to a photo on the table, a smiling woman holding a baby. "I have the best specialists in the country," Richard continued. "Physical therapists, neurologists, psychologists. But what you did yesterday—" He paused, as if the words betrayed him. "It was just a dance, Mr. Montgomery." It was the first time I've seen him smile since the accident. The admission seemed painful. "I don't want a dancer for my son. I want someone who can do what you did. Follow, not lead." Diana studied the man in front of her. Beneath the facade of power and control, she saw what others might miss. A desperate lost father. "I can pay you 5 times what you're making now." Diana stood. "No." Richard looked genuinely shocked, like someone unaccustomed to hearing that word. "I don't work for people who see only my color or my social class before they see my competence," she explained calmly. "And I definitely don't work for people who try to buy solutions to emotional problems." Richard's face flushed. "You're turning down an offer that would solve your financial problems? Out of pride?" "Out of dignity," Diana corrected. "And because your son deserves more than someone hired to pretend to care." She walked to the door, then paused. "Lucas doesn't need more experts. He needs space to lead his own life." "You don't know my son." "No," Diana agreed. "But I know people like him. People whose physical limitations are nothing compared to the invisible cages we build around them." She took a card from her purse and placed it on the table. "Freedom Steps. Classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4 p.m. If you'd like to bring Lucas, the first class is free." As Diana left, she passed Winters, who had obviously been listening behind the door. "You just turned down an offer from Richard Montgomery," Winters whispered incredulously. "Are you crazy?" Diana smiled. "Maybe, but I'd rather be crazy than be property." The following Wednesday, Diana was at the reception desk of the community center when Zoe, her sister and co-founder, came running up. "There's a Bentley parked outside," she whispered nervously, adjusting her hijab. "And you won't believe. Who's inside?" Through the window, Diana saw the luxurious car. Lucas was in the back seat, looking anxiously out the window. Richard remained in the driver's seat, his hands still on the steering wheel, as if fighting an internal battle. "He's not coming in," Zoe predicted. "Men like him don't come to places like this." Diana smiled, remembering Lucas's gaze during those brief moments of dancing. Don't underestimate the power of a determined son. As they watched, the car door opened. Lucas got out slowly, adjusting his leg braces. Then, to everyone's surprise, Richard got out too. The billionaire looked out of place in his casual pants and sweater, an obvious attempt to dress less formally, though still radiating privilege. "I told you he'd come," Diana murmured more to herself than to Zoe. Zoe stared. "What did you do?" Diana didn't answer, but her eyes sparkled with a secret not even her sister fully knew. In her tiny apartment in the Bronx, hidden under her bed, was a notebook filled with notes about children like Lucas and men like Richard. Montgomery, years of observation, research, and a plan that had begun with a simple acceptance of an invitation to dance. What Richard Montgomery didn't know, what he couldn't imagine in his world of glass towers and endless bank accounts, was that Diana Johnson wasn't just a waitress who had agreed to dance with his son. She was a woman with a mission, and his empire of isolation and privilege was about to face its greatest challenge. The simple truth that some of life's greatest lessons cannot be bought. They must be lived. Freedom. Steps operated out of an old community warehouse. Handmade posters decorated the walls with phrases like, "Your rhythm, your rules, and every move counts." When Richard and Lucas entered, children with various types of mobility devices were practicing free movements to the sound of a light beat. Diana approached, wearing simple clothes with the program logo. "Welcome," she said. Lucas watched the children, in awe. A girl in a wheelchair spun in precise circles, while a boy with a prosthetic leg created a sequence of steps. "It looks chaotic," Richard commented, visibly uncomfortable. "There is structure," Diana replied. "It's just not the one you recognize." She turned to Lucas. "Would you like to join in?" The boy nodded enthusiastically, but glanced at his father, hesitant. "Go on," Richard said tensely. "I'll be right here." As Diana guided Lucas to the group, Zoe approached Richard and offered him a chair. "The first day is always the hardest," she commented. "For the parents, not the kids." "This isn't therapy," Richard argued. "I hired the best rehabilitation specialists." And how has that been working for Lucas? Zoe asked gently. The studio. Doctor opened and an older woman entered, leaning on an ornate cane. She had gray hair in elegant braids and a commanding presence. Dr. Elaine Mercer, Zoe whispered, neuroscientist specializing in brain plasticity, retired from Harvard. The woman greeted several children before noticing Richard. Mr. Montgomery, you've rejected my research proposal 3 times in the last 2 years. Dr. Mercer, I didn't expect to see you here. I oversee the research program, she explained. We're studying how non-directive approaches to movement affect neural reconfiguration in children with motor challenges. Research? Richard frowned. I thought this was just a community dance class, Diana returned, leaving Lucas exploring movements with another child. Freedom Steps is a pilot motor rehabilitation program based on the theory of movement autonomy, she explained. We integrate adaptive dance with neuroscientific principles. Why do you work as a waitress if you lead a research program? Because we don't have adequate funding yet. And because people like you rejected us 3 times, the penny dropped. You were Dr. Mercer's assistant on the proposals. Co-author, Dr. Mercer corrected. Diana has an incomplete master's degree because she had to leave college to take care of her sister, but her theoretical work is groundbreaking. You knew who I was at the restaurant, Richard concluded. From the moment you walked in, Diana confirmed. And when Lucas got up to dance, I recognized the opportunity to show, not tell. Was it staged? The dance? Absolutely not. Lucas chose to get up. I chose to follow. A group of reporters entered the studio. Richard immediately tensed. What's this? Part 2 of the plan? Diana smiled slightly. Zoe showed Richard a newly published article. Revolutionary motor rehabilitation methodology shows promising results. We published our first results today, Dr. Mercer explained, and we invited the press. You used my son for a public relations stunt. Richard's voice was pure ice. Diana led him into a side room where photos of dozens of children adorned the walls, each with handwritten progress statistics. On the last wall was an empty frame. What's that? He asked. Our future. The full rehabilitation center we could build if we had the resources. 500 children a year instead of 50. You orchestrated all this, Richard muttered. The dance, the meeting, bringing me here on press day. I saw an opportunity and took it. 4 months ago, when you canceled our meeting without reading the proposal, I promised myself I'd find a way. Diana, Zoe interrupted, it's Lucas. They rushed back. Lucas was in the center of the room, surrounded by other children. Someone had turned off the music and everyone watched in silence. The boy had removed one of his braces and was trying to balance on just one support. Lucas. Richard started forward, but Diana stopped him. Wait. Watch. Lucas took a deep breath. Focused, and to everyone's amazement, especially his father's, he took a complete step without full support. It was small and shaky, but entirely his. The children cheered. Camera flashes went off. Richard's face, usually composed and unreadable, was now exposed, unshed tears glistening in his eyes. That's why we created Freedom Steps, Diana said, softly. It's not about perfect steps. It's about first steps. On your own. Richard watched his son, not as a problem to be managed, but as a complete person discovering his own strength. This could have been done without manipulating me, he said finally. It could have been, if you had answered our calls or read our proposals 3 times. The reporters noticed Richard. A murmur grew as Lucas, oblivious to the tension, continued practicing his new step with pure concentration. Richard Montgomery was cornered. Before him lay 2 options: withdraw in anger, confirming to the press his reputation as cold and calculating, or embrace the moment his son had created. Between the power he had always wielded and the freedom his son needed, Richard found himself in unfamiliar territory, one where neither his money nor his influence defined the next step. The man who controlled every aspect of his life now faced a choice that no amount of wealth could buy. His gaze shifted between his smiling son and the reporters waiting for his reaction. Humility was not a virtue in his vocabulary, but as he saw the transformation on Lucas's face, something inside him began to break. The orchestra of power and privilege he was accustomed to now played a different tune. And he had to decide, would he continue conducting, or would he learn to follow? Richard Montgomery faced the reporters. His son had just taken a step on his own in front of the cameras, and Diana Johnson had skillfully led him to this impossible moment. "Mr. Montgomery," a reporter called, "could you comment on your presence at Freedom Steps today? Is it true that your foundation rejected funding this program 3 times? Richard glanced at Lucas, who was still practicing his new step, oblivious to the political tension. Then, to everyone's surprise, especially Diana's, he smiled. "You know what's hardest for someone in my position?" Richard addressed the reporter, but his voice carried to the entire room. "Admitting when we're wrong." A stunned silence filled the room. The Montgomery Foundation is pleased to announce a commitment to fully fund Freedom Steps for the next 5 years and to build a permanent rehabilitation center based on the methodology developed by Dr. Mercer and Ms. Johnson. Camera flashes exploded. Zoe let out a cry of surprise. "On one condition," he added, watching Diana tense up, "that Ms. Johnson retains complete autonomy over the program and its methodology. No corporate interference." 3 months later, bulldozers were clearing the ground for the new Freedom Steps Rehabilitation Center. The project wasn't the most luxurious the Montgomery Foundation had ever funded, but it was the most innovative, with every space designed with direct input from the children and their families. Diana supervised the construction, frequently but never alone. Lucas showed up regularly, sometimes bringing other children with him, and to the staff's continued surprise, Richard Montgomery also appeared, silently observing the progress. "I never thought you'd actually show up at board meetings," Diana commented one afternoon as they reviewed the plans. "I never thought I'd have to study neuroplasticity at 50, Richard replied, rubbing his tired eyes. In front of him lay a scientific article marked with post-it notes. "But here we are." Diana looked at the man curiously. "Is this part of your public penance, or do you really care?" "Lucas asked to have his second brace removed last week." "I know," she said. "He told me. His previous physical therapist said that would be impossible for at least 2 years. Diana smiled. "But you fired her, remember?" "Because you told me she was wrong." And she was. Diana pointed to a photo of Lucas balancing with only one crutch. "He's progressing faster than any traditional medical prediction." "Why did you never accept my apology?" Richard asked suddenly. "Because you never apologized. You redirected resources, changed policies, funded our program. That's not an apology, it's compensation." Richard nodded slowly. "Fair." At the opening ceremony 6 months later, the contrast with that night in the restaurant couldn't have been greater. The huge adaptive space was filled with children using various types of mobility devices, all moving freely. In the center of the main hall, Lucas, now wearing only a lightweight brace on his left leg, led a small choreographed routine with 3 other children. His movements were still limited, but they flowed with a confidence no doctor had predicted. Richard watched from a distance, not interfering. "He doesn't need you to hold him anymore," Diana said quietly, stepping up beside him. "No," Richard agreed. "But he still needs me to be around." Crucial difference. Richard turned to face her. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what exactly?" "For teaching me to follow." A reporter approached. "Mr. Montgomery, how does it feel to see your son's progress?" Richard looked at Lucas, who was now helping a younger girl find her balance. "Proud. Not of what he's overcome, but of what He's created for others. And what's been the biggest lesson you've learned on this journey? Richard Montgomery, the man once known only for his financial empire, looked directly into the camera. That true leaders aren't those who guide others down the path they believe is right, but those who have the courage to follow when someone shows them a better way. A year later, the Freedom Steps program expanded to 3 new cities. Diana received the Pediatric Rehabilitation Innovation Award, and her methodology began to be implemented in hospitals across the country. Lucas, now using only a light cane on difficult days, enrolled in regular school and became a youth spokesperson for the program, inspiring other children to find their own pace. And Richard learned the hardest and most valuable lesson of all, that true power does not lie in controlling every move, but in knowing when it's time to take a step back and let others lead the way. In a world where powerful people rarely change their perspectives, and where those without power often remain in the shadows, the story of Richard, Diana, and Lucas reminds us that true transformation occurs when we cross the invisible boundaries that separate us, when a billionaire learns from a waitress, when a father follows in his son's footsteps. If this story about how a simple gesture of dignity changed lives forever touched your heart, be sure to subscribe to our channel, because we believe the most profound revolutions don't start with grand manifestos or billion-dollar fortunes. They start when someone has the courage to take an authentic first step and someone else has the wisdom to follow.